My name is James Mallory. I'm 44 years old and I served as a major in the United States Air Force for nearly 2 decades. I spent most of my adult life in uniform, leading missions, mentoring young recruits, and doing what I believed was right for my country and my family. I was proud of the man I had become and the life I had built. After I left the service, I thought the hardest chapters of my life were behind me. I thought I'd finally have the chance to slow down, spend time with my kids, and maybe even fix what years of deployments had strained in my marriage. I was wrong. I had married a woman who was just as dedicated as I was. Only her battlefield was the courtroom. She worked as a legal officer within the military system. Sharp, charismatic, ruthless when she wanted to be. I admired that side of her once. We met during a joint training event in Florida. She challenged my perspective, pushed me to be better, and reminded me that life wasn't only about duty and chain of command. At least, that's what I used to believe. Somewhere along the way, love turned into control, and then silence, and finally, betrayal. 6 months after I hung up my uniform, she filed for divorce. No warning, no attempt to talk things through. Just a knock on my apartment door and a stack of papers. The charges were beyond belief. She accused me of hiding marital funds, of misusing military connections for personal gain, and even emotional neglect toward our children. I couldn't recognize the person she described in that report. And even worse, neither could the judge. It didn't take long before my world started collapsing. She knew the system. She knew which strings to pull. She had connections. And most of all, she had a narrative that made her look like a victim. Meanwhile, I was the disciplined ex-military husband, supposedly too cold, too secretive, too structured for family life. Within weeks, I lost access to my savings. My accounts were frozen during the investigation. The apartment I'd been renting got cleared out by court order. The custody hearings were brutal. She showed emails fabricated. I later realized claiming I threatened to take the kids out of state, and she won. The worst part wasn't losing the house, or the car, or even my name being dragged across every legal record I had spent my life building. It was hearing my daughter tell the judge she didn't feel safe with me. That hit harder than any battle I ever faced. I knew she was being coached. I knew the fear wasn't hers, but I couldn't prove it. I tried to fight back, hired an attorney, gathered character references from old commanders. Nothing worked. Every time I tried to stand up, she knocked me back down with more legal maneuvers. She filed restraining orders that kept me from going near my children's school. She even called my former CO, suggesting I'd breached security protocols after discharge. It didn't matter that none of it held up under scrutiny. The damage was already done. My military reputation, the one thing I had spent my life protecting, was officially stained. Eventually, my attorney told me I needed to settle. He said I was too deep in the hole and that dragging it out would only hurt my chances with the kids. So I did. I signed what she wanted, gave up claims on the house, let her keep the retirement account we'd built together. She got the kids. I got visitation rights once a month, pending review. And even those got delayed. She made sure of it. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but a duffel bag and my old Air Force jacket. My phone buzzed with automated bank alerts showing my accounts dropping to zero. I didn't have a home to go back to. No base to report to. No orders to follow. I was a man without a mission, stripped of everything I thought made me who I was. I was no longer Major Mallory. I was just James. And I was alone. After the divorce, I lived in my truck for almost 3 months. Not some beat-up old pickup either, but the black Chevy I bought the year I made major. It used to be something I was proud of. Now it was just the only thing I had left. I parked near the base, just outside the gate where nobody would ask questions. I showered at a 24-hour gym, slept with a blanket over the window and my uniform jacket rolled up behind my head. Most mornings, I woke up to the sound of jets overhead and wondered if any of the guys I trained were still up there flying. I wondered if they knew what happened to me. I didn't think so. Once you're out, the world keeps turning, and no one looks back. Not for long. The The worst part wasn't the cold or the hunger or the way my back ached from sleeping in the cab. It was the silence. The complete, suffocating silence of no one needing you anymore. I wrote letters to my kids every week. Actual letters. Not texts, not emails. I knew my ex wouldn't let anything electronic reach them. So I bought paper, envelopes, stamps, and wrote like I was still in a tent overseas, trying to keep my children close from miles away. I told them stories from when they were small, reminded them how I used to sing them to sleep, how I held them that night when the storm knocked out the power. I tried to sound like myself, like their dad, but I never heard back. Not once. There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just settles in your bones. It's the look people give you when they recognize your face but not your story. Like the barista who used to greet me as Major, now calling me Sir with an edge of pity. Or the old base commander who crossed the street when he saw me standing outside the PX. I wasn't welcome anymore. Even if I hadn't done what she said, even if no one said it out loud, I was a shadow of who I used to be. And in this world, no one salutes shadows. The hardest nights were the ones when I still believed she might change her mind. That maybe my ex would realize what this was doing to the kids. That maybe the system would see through her lies. But nothing changed. Court dates came and went. Visitation got postponed again. My lawyer stopped answering emails. I got a job washing trucks on the other side of town, off the books, cash only. The hours were long and the work tore my hands open, but I needed something to remind me I was still alive. I kept the kids' school schedule in my wallet. Sometimes I drove by the school during lunch just to see the playground. I never got out of the truck. That would have violated the restraining order, but from across the field, I saw my son once. Just for a second. He was taller now. His walk was different. He didn't see me, but that was probably for the best. I didn't want him to remember me like that, not in that old hoodie, hands shaking from cold, smelling like motor oil. At night, I read the same letter from my dad over and over. He'd written it to me right before his heart gave out. I'd kept it all these years, folded behind my ID in my old uniform wallet. It wasn't long, just a few lines. But every time I read it, I felt like someone still believed in me, even if he was gone. Even if the world had forgotten, my dad hadn't. People think rock bottom is loud. It's not. It's quiet. It's sitting in a truck alone at 3 a.m., staring at your own hands and wondering how they turned into a stranger's. It's realizing no one is coming to save you. Not the law. Not your brothers in arms. Not even your kids. That's when it sinks in. You're on your own. I don't know what kept me going. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was spite, maybe it was just muscle memory. Get up, move forward, don't stop. But even that was starting to fade. I didn't pray. I didn't believe in signs. I just existed, each day folding into the next like a never-ending march with no end in sight. Until the day I walked into that bank. And everything changed. I walked into the bank out of habit more than anything. It was the same military credit union I'd used since I was 20. The account had a few dollars left, just enough to keep it active. I figured I'd close it out, maybe use the last bit for gas. The woman at the counter looked familiar, but I couldn't place her name. She typed in my info, paused, then stared at the screen a moment too long. That kind of pause always meant something was wrong. Or strange. Or both. She stood up without saying much and disappeared into the back. I waited by the counter, arms crossed, wondering if maybe I'd missed a fee or if my account had been flagged for something. When she came back, she wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit walked beside her, holding a plain white envelope with my name handwritten in block letters across the front. He asked me to step into a private room. Just protocol, he said. I didn't argue. I'd lost too much pride already to care about formalities. Inside the room, he sat across from me and slid the envelope over the table, said it had been stored in the vault, that it came with a very specific instruction, only to be given to me under one condition. If I ever tried to close the account and the balance was under $10, I stared at him, then at the envelope. The handwriting was familiar in the way a scent can hit you after years and knock the air from your lungs. My father had written this, and my father had been dead for over 30 years. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, yellowed around the edges, but still sharp in creases, like someone had handled it often or stored it with care. There were two other papers clipped behind it. One looked like a statement, the other, a set of instructions. But I didn't get to those right away. I read the letter first. It wasn't long, maybe 6 lines. My dad's voice came off the page like he was sitting across from me again in his old recliner, sipping black coffee and calling me boy with that half smile. He wrote that if I was reading this, it meant I'd hit bottom, that I'd lost what mattered, and that he was sorry he couldn't be there, but he'd left something behind. Just in case. He wrote that he'd been saving for decades, quietly, carefully. A fund meant to grow over time and protect me from a world that doesn't always play fair. He said I wouldn't understand why until I did. That some storms can't be avoided, only endured. He ended the letter with a sentence that still sits in my chest like a stone. You are not broken. You are just in the middle of the story. I didn't know what to do with any of it. I sat there in that little office, holding that letter, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. I hadn't heard my father's voice in 3 decades. And now, somehow, it was reaching me through time. Not to say goodbye, but to pull me back from the edge. The second sheet in the envelope was a financial statement. I didn't understand it at first. It looked like some kind of investment ledger. Then I saw the date printed at the top. November 1975. My father had opened this account almost a decade before I even joined the Air Force. Long before I knew what sacrifice meant. Long before I had kids of my own. Page after page detailed deposits, dividends, reinvestments. It was all military-based. Defense contractor stocks, bonds linked to federal savings programs. A structure built to grow slowly, invisibly. By the time I reached the bottom of the most recent printout, the total knocked the breath out of me. 46,800,000 and some change. It didn't feel real. I blinked, read it again, counted the zeros like I was checking a mistake. But it was real. Compound interest over 40 years had done what my father hoped it would. Quiet discipline had turned decades of modest deposits into something extraordinary, into a net wide enough to catch me when the world let me fall. I opened the 3rd page. Instructions, written in my father's hand. They were precise, methodical, exactly how I remembered him. He wrote about keeping the fund hidden, said he didn't want it touched unless I was truly in need. Not broke, not struggling, but devastated, betrayed, stripped of the things that matter most. He called it his last mission. Said he had seen enough of the world to know that sometimes life ambushes you, and the only way back is to be rescued. I sat there holding that stack of paper like it was a raft thrown into the ocean. I had spent months sinking, convinced no one would ever come for me, and suddenly, there it was. A life vest from a man who'd been gone for decades. A father's voice speaking through numbers and foresight and love too big to explain in words. I never knew he was planning this. He never said a word. Not to my mother, not to me. But now, somehow, I understood him better than I ever had when he was alive. That moment didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. It felt like being seen. After all the silence, after all the empty mailboxes and courtroom defeats, I felt seen again. By someone who mattered. Someone who had always believed in me, even when I forgot how to believe in myself. I walked out of that bank a different man. Not because I was rich, but because I wasn't invisible anymore. My father saw the storm coming decades before I did. And he built a shelter strong enough to survive it. In that moment, I wasn't lost. I wasn't broken. I was his son, and I was back on my feet. The first thing I did after leaving that bank was find a lawyer who didn't flinch at the word impossible. I wasn't looking for someone to make me feel better. I wanted a fighter. Someone who would see the mess I was in and still believe it could be cleaned up. With the money from my father's fund, I could finally afford the kind of legal team my ex-wife always had. No more public defenders, no more empty promises. We started with the emails. My new attorney hired a digital forensic expert who went line by line through every piece of communication my ex had submitted to the court. It took less than a week to find the inconsistencies, metadata that didn't match, headers that showed files were edited days before hearings. One thread, supposedly written by me, had a timestamp 2 hours before I even bought the phone it was sent from. The lies were sloppy, but hidden under the confidence of someone who never thought she'd be challenged. Then came the military access logs. She had used her credentials as a legal officer to dig into sealed documents. Stuff she had no clearance to view. Financial records, personnel reviews, even deployment summaries. All of it used to paint me as unstable, aggressive, incapable of raising children. We pulled server reports showing her login trail, everything linked back to her IP. When we brought it to court, the judge asked for a recess on the spot. The hearing to reverse the custody ruling took place in the same courtroom where I'd signed away my rights months before. But this time, I walked in with evidence. This time, I wasn't broken, or begging for someone to believe me. I was prepared. We laid it all out. The doctored emails, the illegal data access, character witnesses who had been ignored before, and then, finally, the financial motive. My attorney showed that my ex had somehow known about my father's investment fund. She'd mentioned it in a private message to her sister a year before she filed for divorce. She knew what was waiting, and she wanted it. When the judge gavelled that final ruling, the room went silent. I was granted full custody of both children. My visitation would begin immediately, with no restrictions. The court also found sufficient cause to refer my ex-wife for legal misconduct and perjury. Her license to practice military law was suspended within the week. She appealed, of course, tried to spin it all as a misunderstanding, a mistake in judgment. But the damage was done. Her own arrogance had caught up with her. Seeing her face as the verdict was read didn't bring me joy. It brought closure, the kind I never thought I'd get. The kind that doesn't look like revenge, but like a door closing quietly after years of chaos. My kids ran to me after the ruling. My daughter cried against my chest. My son said he didn't understand everything, but he always missed me. That was enough. That made every cold night in the truck worth it. I took them home that night, not back to the life we had, but to something new. We talked, we unpacked things slowly, not just boxes, but pain, memories, fears. I didn't push. I listened. I let them see the man I'd become after everything. The man their grandfather always knew I could be. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I just wanted to rebuild from it. Justice doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it shows up in the form of a stamped court order and 2 kids sleeping in their own beds for the first time in months. Sometimes it looks like peace. I didn't need to win everything. I just needed the truth to stand. And this time it did. 1 month after the court ruling, I took my son to Arlington. It was early morning, quiet, with only the sound of wind moving through the rows of headstones. We found my father's marker beneath a tall oak, the grass around it still damp from the night before. I hadn't been there in years, not since the funeral. I brought the letter with me, the one he left in the bank vault. I wanted my son to hear it from the source, to understand the man who saved us without saying a word. We stood there, and I read the final lines aloud. My father wrote that life would test me in ways he never could prepare me for. That pain would come not from enemies, but from people I once trusted. And that if I ever felt alone, truly alone, I should remember this one truth. He would always be with me. That his love wasn't in medals or uniforms or words, but in what he left behind. Not the money, not the account, but the belief that I was never meant to stay down. My son didn't say much. He just held my hand. We stayed there for a long time, not needing to fill the silence. I felt something settle inside me that day. Not revenge, not triumph, just peace. I realized I didn't need to chase anything anymore. Not a title, not approval, not even justice. I had my kids, I had my name, and I had the memory of a man who taught me the quiet power of faith. We walked back to the car together. I looked back one last time before we drove away. That was my father's final salute. And now it's my turn to live a life worthy of it.